My life is my life, and I try to look back, and I was born in a family that never had a lot of money. We were never terribly poor. My father dropped out of high school, came from Poland when he had no money. My mother graduated high school, never went to college. We lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn. My mother's dream was to own her own home, never happened. My father worked every day of his life, worked hard. He was a paint salesman, never made a whole lot of money. And my brother and I were lucky enough, they were very proud that my brother and I were able to go to college. So I think I would start off, the first point that I'd make, and the most important point, is that whatever I've done in my life, writing, being mayor of Burlington, congressman, U.S. senator, I have always believed from the bottom of my heart that everything that I do and what I say represents the vast majority of the people. Sometimes I think there are progressives out there who think, well, we're fighting for social justice, we're this, we're that. It's too bad that we're in a minority, but someday the majority will catch up with us. I've never believed that for one moment. Everything I'm going to tell you tonight that John and I are going to discuss, everything I've ever talked about, every idea that I've ever espoused, I believe is what the vast majority of the people of our country believe.
Make a change in your life and make it for the better. Don't you wait no longer. If it's pushing back further, it's not for the young, it's not for the old, it's not for the quick and crazy, it's not for the bold, it's not for one generation.
You are different. Why? Because you are certainly shrewd enough to be a politician of a different manner. You're certainly smart enough and have been here enough moons to know how to properly take advantage of the political system.
Let's back it up.
But why?
Yeah, I am different.
Why?
Because I never got into politics. See, a lot of people get into politics and they say, okay, I'm 24 now. Where will I be when I'm 30?
Yeah.
Maybe by the time I'm 54, I can run for president of the United States. They got it all calculated.
Gotcha.
All right. I ran for office the first time in my life for the United States Senate in the state of Vermont. You know what percentage of the vote I got, Mike? Take a wild and crazy guess.
15, 20?
Nah, 2%.
I was really going to guess that.
All right, now, would I be a smart politician to run on a third party, not the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party, running on a small third party, talking about, in those days, social and economic justice and the war in Vietnam, all right? So I was a different type of politician. And I ran a year later. You know what I got? 1% of the vote. I was going in the wrong direction, all right. So I think it's fair to say that my political career is different than anybody else's because I didn't get into politics to figure out how I could become president or a senator. I got into politics because I give a damn, all right? Because I do think it is an outrage that we have people sleeping out on the streets in this country. That 51% of young African-American kids are unemployed or underemployed. That millions of people don't have any health insurance. That's what I feel in my gut, and that's what I'm fighting to change.
After the first Democratic debate, Paul Krugman, who wrote in the New York Times a piece that said basically because there's going to be a Republican House, it's limited in terms of what a Democratic president can do to change the banks, and therefore you and Hillary Clinton are roughly equivalent because you would never be able to get past what you would want to get past. What do you think of that argument?
Well, John, you know, I've heard that argument many, many times, and I really don't accept it. What I am trying to do in this campaign, with some success, is to call for what I call a political revolution, to rally millions of people, many of whom have given up on the political process, young people who have never been involved before, working people who have been so alienated by big money in politics, they've kind of tuned out. And we're trying to bring them together. And when you bring people together, to fight for an agenda, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, pay equity for women workers, creating millions of jobs by rebuilding our infrastructure, and taking on Wall Street and breaking up these banks. I think you can do it. You can only do it, however, if millions of people get involved in the political process in a way that they are not involved right now.
President Obama was doing this in 2008 as he was campaigning, and again in 2012 as he was running for re-election. Isn't that what was supposed to happen?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, more or less it was.
So how did he do?
Here's how we did. Let me say this. Barack Obama campaigned for me in 2006 when I was running for the U.S. Senate, helped me get elected. I campaigned for him in 2008 and 2012, and I think against unbelievable Republican obstructionism, he has done a lot of things that are right. Our economy today is in a heck of a better shape than it was when George W. Bush left office, and we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. But your point is an interesting point. I would say that Barack Obama made a political mistake in the sense that in 2008 he ran a brilliant, underlined, brilliant campaign, one of the great campaigns in American history, excited people, brought millions of people together. But I think that in essence what he did after the election was to say to those people, hey, thanks so much for electing me. I will take it from here on myself, on my own. I'm going to sit down with John Boehner, and I'm going to sit down with Mitch McConnell, and we're just going to negotiate something that's fair. That was the mistake. We're standing in front of the Lincoln Monument today, one of the most beautiful buildings in our country and one of the most historic. And today, the area is filled with tourists, but 50 years ago, there were several 100,000 people here to listen to one of the most memorable and important speeches in the modern history of the United States of America, and that is the famous Martin Luther King Jr. speech, I Have a Dream. I remember that very well, not by simply seeing it on TV or reading about it. I was way, way back there, one of the several 100,000 people who was here. I came in on a bus from the University of Chicago, where I was then going to school. I remember the day very well, and I remember the moment, the period well, because up at the University of Chicago, where I was then going to school, we were working with young people in the South. There was then an organization called SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We were helping to raise some money for their efforts to desegregate the South at the same time as we were working on issues in Chicago. I think as we reflect back on this very, very great man, certainly one of the great leaders in American history, we understand that in one hand we have come a very, very long way in achieving his vision of a country in which there's far more racial justice today than there was in his lifetime. Many of the barriers of segregation have been broken. I think he would have been very surprised to know that in the year 2013, not only would we have an African American as President of the United States, but that gentleman would have been re-elected. So in that sense, and in many other areas, we have come a very long way. We have a right to be proud of our accomplishments. But on the other hand, let us not forget that what King was talking about was not only racial justice, he was talking about economic justice. When he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, he was there not on a quote-unquote civil rights demonstration. He was there working with mostly African-American garbage collectors, people who were being exploited, people who were earning inadequate wages, people who had terrible working conditions, and he said they deserve justice.
So often we overlook the worth and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and it has worth.
He was working on a major project called the Poor People's March, not just for African Americans, but for whites, for Hispanics, for Native Americans. And the point that he was making was that in a great country like the United States, we should not be spending huge amounts of money on the military when we had children in America going hungry. We should not be having the kind of income and wealth inequality that we had, where so few had so much and so many people had so little. And the truth of the matter is that 50 years later, in many ways, that aspect of King's dream, the economic aspect, is not only not better, it is probably worse. Black unemployment today for young people, youth, 40%. More income and wealth inequality today than existed during King's period. $600 billion being spent on the military today when we have a lot of people struggling to purchase food or to pay for prescription drugs, unable to afford to go to college, people working at $7.50 an hour, unable to pay their bills, unable to have the money they need, the income they need to live with dignity. We have come a long, long way in a lot of areas in fulfilling some of the visions that this great man had. But on the other hand, let us not forget for 1 second that a lot of what he talked about, a lot of his dreams, still have not been fulfilled. So we got a lot of work that remains in front of us if, in fact, we are going to fully honor and give respect to this very, very great man.
How great of effect did Dr. King has he had on your life? It seems that you took up what he, and not just, what pulled me to you was your Voters' Rights Act interview. Well, you talked about the restoration of the Voters' Rights Act. And I remember thinking to myself, who the fuck is this crazy white guy? Like, it didn't even make sense to me because I have lived in Atlanta all my life and I virtually heard no black politicians angry about it. I virtually heard no black politicians outraged about it. You were the only voice of outrage.
Let me tell you something. This is true. I am a fierce believer in democracy. You know what? I love democracy.
Yeah.
I love the fact that in this room somebody disagrees with me. They say, Bernie, you're full of shit. I'm going to vote against you.
Yeah.
It's fine. I love it. I love people thinking about what kind of future they want. And I feel, because I've been in politics for many years, running many elections, that these people all over America now, as a result of the Supreme Court decision to gut the Voting Rights Act, day after, they're sitting up thinking, all right, great. How do we deny people the right to vote?
Yeah.
They are cowards.
Absolutely.
They are cowards because they're afraid to contest a free and fair election. They can't win it. So they got to figure out, how do I come up with some cockamamie scheme to deny some little old lady the right to vote because she's going to vote against it? That disgusts me. Yeah. Profoundly disgusts me. So what we have got to do is in this country do what many other countries around the earth do. You're 18 years of age, you're registered to vote. Let's forget all the rest of the crap.
Yeah.
And if you want to commit voter fraud, you vote twice, you're going to pay a heavy price for that.
Absolutely.
Okay. But everybody has the right to vote.
I want to ask you, because I think a lot of people don't know much about your background on this subject, and it's interesting, 54 years ago, you were in the front lines of trying to desegregate school housing at the University of Chicago. You were even arrested.
Don't tell anybody that.
What was it that motivated a 20-year-old white kid from Brooklyn to do that?
You know, it's hard to say what motivates anybody. I think as a kid, my parents weren't political. My brother was a little bit, my parents were not. But, like in any school, you see big kids picking on little kids, and I resented that. I always did. And, injustice bothered me very, very much. And when I went to the University of Chicago, I had the opportunity to, I wasn't a great student, I have to admit it. In fact, I learned more off campus. Shouldn't say this to other students, though. Do your homework, study, but...
Got a lot of teachers in this room.
But I learned a lot off of campus, and I got involved in a group, some may know, some not, called the Congress on Racial Equality, CORE. And it was a great group. We got involved in trying to desegregate housing owned by the University of Chicago, segregated housing. And we also got involved in efforts to desegregate the school system there, and I got arrested. But I think, you know, as far back as I can remember, and Anderson, I can't tell you why, but injustice is something that I have always fought throughout my life.
Shocking doubt. The same people that would vote to cut defense $177 billion, the same ones that would put homos in the military, the same ones that would not fund BRAC, the same ones that would not clear up. No, I will not. Sit down, you socialist.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yield.
The committee will
the ludicrousy of
Mr.
this, even
the
to
committee
appeal
will be in
this.
order, and the gentleman will suspend. The gentleman from Vermont.
I wonder if I could question the gentleman. I am rising in support of the amendment.
The chair is in charge. The chair is speaking. The gentleman from Vermont has been recognized for a period of 5 minutes, and you may now proceed.
I thank the chairman very much. I would like the opportunity, if the gentleman from California would respond, just to ask him a brief question, if I might. Now, my ears may have been playing a trick on me, but I thought I heard the gentleman a moment ago say something, quote unquote, about homos in the military. Was I right in hearing that expression?
Absolutely. Putting homosexuals in the military.
You said something about homos in the military. Was the gentleman referring to the many thousands and thousands of gay people who have put their lives on the line in countless wars defending this country? Was that the group of people that the gentleman was referring to?
I'm talking about the military. People in the military do not support.
That's not what we were talking about. You used the word homos in the military. You have insulted thousands of men and women who have put their lives on the line.
I'm talking about you and liberals like you that keep the foreign defense.
Gentlemen,
reclaiming my time. I go out to high schools all over the state of Vermont. I go to the conservative parts of the state, and I ask the kids, I said, raise your hand. Tell me what you think about gay marriage. And kids kind of shrug their shoulders, and they say, what are you talking about? What is the big deal? Which is exactly what we've always wanted in the first place. What is the big deal? All right. The point is that when millions of people stand up and fight, they win. That's it. And when people do not stand up and fight,
today is a tragic day for humanity, for the people of Iraq, for the people of the United States, and for the United Nations as an institution. It is also a tragic day for the future of our planet and for the children, 30,000 of whom in the third world will starve to death today while we spend billions to wage this war, and 25% of whom live in poverty in our own country because we apparently lack the funds to provide them a minimal standard of living. I fear very much that what we said yesterday is that war and the enormous destructive power of our armed forces is our preferred manner for dealing with the very complicated and terrible crises in the Middle East. I fear that someday we will regret that decision and that we are in fact laying the groundwork for more and more wars in that region in years to come. Mr. Speaker, it is incumbent upon us to do everything in our power now that the war has started to prevent unnecessary bloodshed and to support our troops in the most basic way by bringing them home alive and well. I urge my fellow members to ask the President to stop the bombing immediately and request that the Secretary General of the United Nations go to Iraq to begin immediate negotiations for the withdrawal of Iraq from Kuwait and the cessation of the war. Let us do everything in our power to stop unnecessary bloodshed. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, in the brief time I have, let me give you 5 reasons why I'm opposed to giving the President a blank check to launch a unilateral invasion and occupation of Iraq, and why I will vote against this resolution. 1, I have not heard any estimates of how many young American men and women might die in such a war, or how many tens of thousands of women and children in Iraq might also be killed. As a caring nation, we should do everything we can to prevent the horrible suffering that a war will cause. War must be the last recourse in international relations, not the first. Second, I am deeply concerned about the precedent that a unilateral invasion of Iraq could establish in terms of international law and the role of the United Nations. If President Bush believes that the U.S. can go to war at any time against any nation, what moral or legal obligation could our government raise if another country chose to do the same thing? Third, the United States is now involved in a very difficult war against international terrorism, as we learned tragically on September 11th. We are opposed by Osama bin Laden and religious fanatics who are prepared to engage in a kind of warfare that we have never experienced before. I agree with Brent Scowcroft, Republican former National Security Advisor for President George Bush Sr., who stated, and I quote, "An attack on Iraq at this time would seriously jeopardize, if not destroy, the global counterterrorist campaign we have undertaken," end quote. Fourth, at a time when this country has a $6 trillion national debt and a growing deficit, we should be clear that a war and a long-term American occupation of Iraq could be extremely expensive. Fifth, I am concerned about the problems of so-called unintended consequences. Who will govern Iraq when Saddam Hussein is removed? And what role will the U.S. play in an ensuing civil war that could develop in that country? Will moderate governments in the region who have large Islamic fundamentalist populations be overthrown and replaced by extremists? Will the bloody conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Authority be exacerbated? And these are just a few of the questions that remain unanswered. If a unilateral American invasion of Iraq is not the best approach, what should we do? In my view, the U.S. must work with the United Nations to make certain, within clearly defined timelines, that the UN inspectors are allowed to do their jobs. These inspectors should undertake an unfettered search for Iraqi weapons of mass destruction and destroy them when found, pursuant to past UN resolutions. If Iraq resists inspection and elimination of stockpiled weapons, we should stand ready to assist the UN in enforcing compliance.
When this country was founded, only white male property owners over age 21 could vote, but people fought to change that, and we became a more inclusive democracy. After the Civil War, we amended the Constitution to allow non-white men to vote. We became a more inclusive democracy. In 1920, after years of struggle and against enormous opposition, we finally ratified the 19th Amendment guaranteeing women the right to vote. We became a more inclusive democracy. In 1965, under the leadership of Martin Luther King Jr. and other great heroes, the civil rights movement finally succeeded in outlawing racism at the ballot box, and LBJ signed the Voting Rights Act. We became a more inclusive democracy. 1 year after that, the Supreme Court ruled that the poll tax was unconstitutional, that people could not be denied the right to vote because they were low income. We became a more inclusive democracy. In 1971, young people throughout the country were saying, we're being drafted to go to Vietnam and get killed, but we're 18 and we don't have the right to vote. We passed the constitutional amendment. The voting age was lowered to 18. We became a more inclusive democracy. Mr. Chairman, the democratic foundations of our country and this movement toward a more inclusive democracy are now facing the most severe attacks, both economically and politically, that we have seen in the modern history of the United States. Tragically, and I say these words advisedly, we are well on our way to seeing our great country move toward an oligarchic form of government where virtually all economic and political power rests with a handful of very wealthy families. Citizens United is a part of that process, and that is a trend we must reverse. Economically, the United States today has by far the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth, and that inequality is worse today than it was in any time since the late 1920s. One family, the Walton family of Walmart fame, owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. Bottom 60% own less than 2% of the wealth. top 1% owns 40% of the wealth. Now, that is what is going on economically in this country. A handful of billionaires own a significant part of the wealth of America and have enormous control over our economy. What the Supreme Court did in Citizens United is say to these same billionaires, you own and control the economy, you own Wall Street, you own the coal companies, you own the oil companies. Now, for a very small percentage of your wealth, we're going to give you the opportunity to own the United States government. That is the essence of what Citizens United is all about, and that is why it must be overturned. Let us be clear. Why should we be surprised that one family worth $50 billion is prepared to spend $400 million in this election to protect their interest? That is a small investment for them and a good investment. But it is not just the Koch brothers. Mr. Chairman, there are at least 23 billionaire families who have contributed a minimum of $250,000 each into the political process up to now during this campaign. And my guess is that number is really much greater because many of these contributions are made in secret. In other words, not content to own our economy, the 1% want to own our government as well. The constitutional amendment that Congressman Ted Deutsch and I have introduced states the following. For-profit corporations are not people and are not entitled to any rights under the Constitution. For-profit corporations are entities of the states and are subject to regulation by the legislatures of the states so long as the regulations do not limit the freedom of the press. For-profit corporations are prohibited from making contributions or expenditures into political campaigns. Congress and the states have the right to regulate and limit all political expenditures and contributions, including those made by a candidate. I am proud to say that the American people are making their voices heard on this issue. You got over close to 2 million signatures right there on a petition. In my state of Vermont, we have seen dozens and dozens of towns go on record as saying they support a constitutional amendment, and we have 6 states having done the same. You have some very good amendments here with Senator Baucus, Senator Udall, and Congresswoman Edwards. I hope we move on this issue because the future of American democracy is at stake. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Sanders.
And this is a really serious issue. We have more people in jail today than any other country on earth. You all know that? We have large numbers of lives that have been destroyed because of this war on drugs and because people, were caught smoking marijuana and so forth. I think we have got to end the war on drugs. And, looking at what's going on in Colorado and elsewhere, but I am not unfavorably disposed to moving toward the legalization of marijuana.
Would you?
I rise this afternoon to say a few words about the immigration reform bill that, as I understand it, we will begin discussing next week. And as the son of an immigrant, somebody who came to this country at the age of 17 without a nickel in his pocket and who was able to send his 2 kids to college, needless to say, I support immigration. Our country is unique in the world. Our country is great because, in fact, we are the sons and daughters of immigrants, and I think we should all be very proud of that. The issue that we're talking about today is about fundamental rights, and it is about ending the disgrace, the national disgrace, that the United States of America remains the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to our people as a right of citizenship. Health care is absolutely a human right, whether you're rich or whether you're poor or whether you are in the middle class.
Every person in this country has a right to know that when he or she gets sick, they're not going to face bankruptcy. They're not going to delay going to the doctor because they can't afford the deductible. That they know that they go to the doctor, they go to the hospital when they need to because they are a human being entitled to health care. That's point number one. Point number two, and what we say to our conservative friends who talk about waste every single day, there is no healthcare system in the world that comes close to being as wasteful and bureaucratic as our system. Why are we spending 30% of every healthcare dollar on administration and bureaucracy? We should be putting that money into doctors, into nurses, into disease prevention, into keeping our people healthy. We recently, a couple of months ago, I had the ambassador from Denmark visiting the state of Vermont. They provide health care to all of their people without out-of-pocket expense at 50% of what we are spending when we end up having tens of millions of people uninsured, people paying large co-payments and deductibles. So to our conservative friends, if you want to stop wasting money, let's pass the cost-effective way to provide universal health care to all of our people, and that is through a single-payer system.
All right, let me talk a moment about something that I know everybody in this room, especially the young people, are concerned about, and that's education. I think everybody here knows that to be educated, intellectual pursuit, is part of what makes us human. But in addition to that, we are in a highly competitive global economy, and common sense suggests that we have got to have the best educated workforce in the entire world. 30 years ago in the United States, the United States led the world in terms of the percentage of our people who graduated college. Today, we are in 12th place. Today, all over this country, in every state in the union, you have young people who are saying, you know what? Yeah, I'm smart. Yeah, I really would like to go to college, but I don't want to leave school $60,000, $70,000 in debt in an unstable economy. I'm not going. So think of what that means to our country in that we're wasting the intellectual capital of so many bright young people. And then on top of that, you have millions of people who have graduated college and are now deeply in debt. I talked to a woman in Burlington, Vermont, 6 months ago. Her crime was that she went to medical school and is now practicing medicine with low-income people, primary health care. Exactly what we need because we have a crisis in terms of the need of primary health care physicians. She's doing exactly what our country needs. She graduated medical school, $300,000 in debt. So what we are doing, in a sense, is saying to the young people of this country that we're going to do everything we can to make it as hard as possible for you to get an education. That is crazy. Within the next month, I will introduce legislation that will make every public college and public university tuition free. People say, is that expensive? And the answer is, yeah, it is expensive, but it is more expensive not to do that. And maybe at a time when my Republican friends just decided to put another $38 billion into the military, maybe we can cut military spending a little bit and put it into education.
How can you do that? I mean, you're promising free health care for everybody, college for everybody, paid leave, and you haven't yet said how you're going to pay for it. And you've suggested you would tax the wealthiest Americans at a rate about 90%.
No, I did not suggest that.
Then
no,
what would you tax the wealthiest Americans?
This
how
is
would
what
you
we
pay
would
for
do.
This plan?
This is what we would do. If you want tuition-free public colleges and universities, which I believe we will have a tax on Wall Street speculation, which will more than pay for that. We will end the fact that profitable corporations, in some cases in America today, pay zero in federal taxes because they stash their money in the Cayman Islands.
Can I talk about something we might disagree on?
Let's do it.
I'm from the South. I like guns. I like guns a lot. I own guns. My father was a police officer and was a gun owner. He was a police officer. Also was a union steward, which is another reason I'm so on the bandwagon with you.
He was a union steward within the...
No, he was a union steward with the gas company after he left the police force. But I have two cousins that are currently on the police force, and that both are police union members too. So I support you wholeheartedly when it comes to unions.
Let's talk about guns.
And I don't want to, but guns. And I'm not saying I disagree. I say we may. I represent a group of people only 50 years into freedom. I represent a group of people who are being killed by the people who their tax money pays. I represent a group of people who are in urban areas because of poverty and because of being ignored by government in places like Chicago. Certain areas have become pockets of violence, less violent than 20 years ago. But it's certainly harder for, if I'm a husband and a father and a homeowner, to defend my homestead in case of things. What is your true stance to guns, speaking to my community directly now, because we have a different view of gun ownership where I'm from?
Okay. Well, my state, do you know how much gun control there is in the state of Vermont?
How much?
None. Virtually none. Okay. In my state, what a gun means is you go out hunting. A lot of people hunt.
Here too, absolutely. I got some deer meat in the freezer.
All right, let's sit down and eat it.
You should.
All right, so you got a lot of hunters. You got a lot of guys who do target practice. You got a lot of gun shows, people looking to antique guns and stuff like that.
And I know you want to close those loopholes.
Right, all right, so here's the story. Do people have a right to own weapons? Of course they do, okay? But what don't people have a right to do? Should somebody who has a criminal record or has a record of beating up his wife, should they be able to get a gun? I don't think so. All right. So what you need is enforced and strong instant background checks. You got a problem with that?
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
And Bill O'Reilly can't own a gun, so that's good. Because we know what he does.
Yeah, all right. So this guy's trying to get me into real trouble here, I can see that.
I wanted you to be my president.
All right. And, all right, so you got instant background checks.
Gotcha.
Good question. This was where we may disagree. All right, some guy walks down the street with an assault weapon, military weapon. Is he a right to have that gun?
I say yes, and I'm going to tell you why.
Okay.
I really believe the part of the Constitution that says that's our last defense against tyranny. I believe that if you're involved in the voting process, that's your first defense against tyranny, to be actively and politically engaged. And I definitely believe, because I represent a group of people that's only 50 years into freedom, and I also represent a group of people where, if we judge by the last 2 years, it's okay to shoot them down in the street, whether you're an officer or not, based on the Zimmerman case down in Florida. And I don't want the people I pay to be able to own something I don't. And I do also know this about assault weapons or military-grade weapons. The AR-15 replica that I can buy from a Walmart is not the same thing a servicemen use. It's not fully automatic. I don't have oftentimes the magazine capacity they will. And, you know, more likely than not, I'm not going to be engaged in a situation where I'm actually using it, so I don't see the need to ban it.
Okay, well, that's one we disagree on.
Okay.
All right.
Respect.
All right. Next one, the gun show loophole.
Yeah.
All right. I think we got to end that.
I can't get mad at you for straw purchasers.
That's right.
Yeah, I can't argue.
So the gun show loophole is a way to avoid the instant background check.
It is.
And then you got another one is with the straw man situation. You go in there, you're perfectly legal, you buy 20 guns.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're giving out to...
I can understand closing
That's
the
it.
loophole.
Those
Absolutely.
are my views.
Absolutely.
That's it. So we disagree on assault weapons.
We do.
All right, that's fine.
That's it.
All right, but I think what I want to do is to try...
And let me say this. That doesn't jump me off your boat. You know, for people who may see this conversation, that's not enough to get me off the Bernie Sanders bus. You know, and I just like other gun owners to know that.
Right. All right. So, you know, I have gotten criticized, as you may know, by my opponents that I'm a hack of the NRA and all of that stuff, and that's cool.
And I'm an NRA member, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for you.
Okay. So that's where we are.
biggest public misconception about you?
Well, people think I am grumpy. People think I am too serious. But I think what people don't see is I have 7 beautiful grandchildren who are the joy of my life.
Let us be lovers, we'll marry our fortunes together. I've got some real estate here in my bag. Counting the cars on the New Jersey Turnpike, they've all come to look for America. All come to look for
I'm Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.